Hello. I'm Robert J. Sawyer, and this is Supernatural Investigator. This week, we begin a two-part investigation of Toronto author and journalist Joe Fisher and his disturbing encounter with channeling. Trance channelers believe that wisdom and guidance can come from the spirits of the dead. Our supernatural investigator is documentary filmmaker Doug Williams, for whom Joe Fisher's mysterious death raises many questions. His intention to report on what he thought was simply a lucrative New Age hoax was eventually replaced by a fervent desire to prove its basis in reality. Whom do these spirits of the dead belong to? Is channeling a dangerous hoax? If so, a hoax perpetrated by whom? Doug Williams asks, what killed Joe Fisher? On this week's Supernatural Investigator.
My name is Doug Williams. These boxes contain the Joe Fisher Archive at the University of Manitoba and constitute an extraordinary record of one man's struggle to reveal and explain the spiritual nature of death. Born in Bristol in 1947, Joe Fisher became the youngest news editor in England at age 22, and a few years later he was Toronto's top crime reporter, breaking some of the city's most sensational stories.
Joe Fisher and I met when he was at the Toronto Sun. I was his editor, and we did a news magazine together, and he was one of my best writers.
You never got the sense when you were reading anything that he was struggling with a thought. It was just so clearly put.
He was perhaps one of the first, shall we say, metaphysical journalists, or journalists who investigated metaphysics. Joe was, all his life, fascinated, even obsessed with what happens to us after we die.
How do you describe yourself?
Well, I'm a writer, Tom. I mean, I look at and investigate the paranormal, the supernatural, call it what you will. But first and foremost, I'm a writer.
Joe Fisher's interest in the paranormal and reincarnation followed a painful break with his parents' Christian fundamentalism.
My father is a retired Baptist minister, and my mother has psychic ability, but she's now a Jehovah's Witness. And so the fundamentalist Christianity and the psychic seem to be at war within my family. And they're still at war because my parents don't like what I do.
He was rebelling against his parents' religion, that he was really angry at their Christian fundamentalism. And I think in a way he was on a quest. But oddly, he was on a quest to debunk as opposed to a quest for the truth. He wanted to expose lies.
He was a ruthless investigator who adored the quest for the unknown.
Joe had a tendency towards the dark side. He was fascinated by the dark side, sort of titillated by the occult, by that which was unseen and a little bit dangerous.
Published in 22 languages, Joe wrote 8 books in all and sold over 1 million copies. One of them, The Case for Reincarnation, boasted a preface by the Dalai Lama.
He sold his books. He was a publisher's delight. He was a really weathered media figure. He was great at it. Great. He was really entertaining.
When we talk about the subject of reincarnation, of course, Shirley MacLaine's name comes up, and it's given the subject real prominence. That's going to be our subject today, as I have as my guest Joe Fisher. He's the author of a number of books dealing with the area. Picking up the title of your book, The Case for Reincarnation, what is it?
There's lots of evidence, and if we go back to the ancient times, we can see reincarnation in pretty well all the major religions. Young children will talk about previous lives between the ages of 2 and 8 very often.
Well, what did you have to work on in this incarnation?
Well, I think I had to work on bringing out the message of reincarnation to the public, which is why I'm sitting in this chair today.
On its surface, Joe's fate was inextricably bound up with the New Age movement. It combined Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Gnosticism, and Western shamanism. A soothing cultural hybrid, ideal for the yuppie consumer.
Yeah, because Eastern religions are very, very appealing to the intellect. They really allow us to calm our minds down if we've been raised by fundamentalists.
Then trance channeling, the practice of speaking to spirits of the dead through a medium, took the New Age movement by storm.
There's a kind of psychic glamour to it, and people get caught up in the, oh, it's very exciting, and isn't this fantastic, and it's actually happening. And of course, it's mesmerizing. I mean, on a very basic level, we are all fascinated with the possibility of ghosts.
Why would anyone want to speak to the dead? Well, perhaps we'd get answers to life's most troubling questions. In Joe's case, he wanted proof of reincarnation, of the reality of past lives, proof that he had lived before.
Hi, Joe. Oh, everybody, it's Joe Fisher.
Would you like to know the name of your spirit guide, Joe Fisher?
To Joe's astonishment, someone stepped forward to furnish that proof. Joe Fisher spent much of his professional life encountering forces from which most people instinctively flee.
Joe decided, okay, he's going to investigate channeling. He was always a very good newspaper reporter, and so he doesn't just write, he investigates. He gets a call from an Australian woman in Toronto, and she was a medium. She calls him up and says, well, you know, come over and see us. I'm a channeler. And so she was channeling people, meaning she goes into a trance as a medium.
She's Aviva Newman, a pseudonym. Aviva kindly agreed to be interviewed about Joe if her identity is concealed.
I was a facilitator. I used to go to sleep every Friday night so that the people who came could talk to their guides.
She can be surrounded by 20 or 30 people, and she can produce a guide for each person who's speaking to her with a different voice, often with a different language, with a different personality.
You know what I mean? You just got to go within yourself and find those answers.
All of a sudden, she changed the voice, the intonation, the everything that would come through would be somewhat different. It would almost be like her face was out of putty or something, because it would almost flow and change, or there was maybe an imprint of another face over hers. But I would be watching this and I would go, my God, you know, what is happening here? It was really startling to be part of that.
And I didn't think the greatest actor who's ever lived could ever duplicate that. I mean, just on memory alone, it would have been remarkable for her to remember all this and keep track and never slip up, and she wouldn't slip up at all.
Anything that went on happened while I was asleep. I had no way of stopping it because I didn't know it was happening. I didn't know what was going on.
And she tells you you've got a spirit guide called Philippa, who's Greek, right?
That's right, yes. Well, she went into trance, and a male voice spoke through her.
Would you like to know the name of your spirit guide, Joe Fisher?
Yes, of course I would.
Well, her name's Philippa. She lived in Greece between the years 1718 and 1781. She was a Greek peasant girl and worked in the fields. You, Joseph, were a soldier, a Greek soldier, and fought against the Turks. You and Philippa became lovers. Oh, your love spanned over 17 incarnations. She's now in the position to be your spirit guide. She's looking after you from the non-material realm. You understand me, Sonny?
Now, I didn't know what to think of this at first. I may be an investigative reporter, but she was able, as the guides are always able to do, would go right to your most vulnerable point.
It's as if he had something in his mind that he saw her as the perfect woman, or the perfect woman for him.
As his body would move back and forth and quiver, and his eyes would light up like it was a pinball machine.
I think that was part of Joe's character, that he was seduced by that. He really was seduced by Philippa.
He managed to fall in love with a spirit who's non-physical, you know? Now that's irrational. And it's even more irrational than a long-distance relationship, which is about as irrational as a relationship can get. No, he fell in love with a woman he met through a psychic channeler.
Now, all lovers sometimes have communication problems. But imagine being in love with a ghost you can talk to only through a medium. Yet, in this life, Joe was far from desperate for female company. Young, intelligent, charming, and successful, he was attractive to many women on the earth plane.
Joe was definitely a ladies' man.
There was something very childlike about Joe and vulnerable, and that was also part of his charm and the reason why women liked him, I think.
I think the women in his life, I think they taught him a lot, and he listened.
He was interesting, his writing was interesting, he was very professional, he had his, kind of spiritual quest. So there was lots that was compelling about Joe.
The truth is that Joe was looking for something ordinary earth girls couldn't give him.
I like the idea that I have a non-physical guardian looking over me, as many people do.
You were right to believe.
There's a great tradition of non-physical guardianship in all parts of the earth, going back to Socrates and before. The guardian angel in the Roman Catholic tradition is, after all, a guide, really.
I went to a trance channeling session once. Despite my skepticism, the experience was undeniably powerful. But the prerequisite is belief, or a willingness to believe.
My experience of journalists who begin investigating the paranormal is that very quickly they cross over the line between investigator into protagonists and propagandists for it. And I wonder if you feel that you've crossed that line yourself.
Is channeling real or hoax? Did Joe really communicate with spirits of the dead?
It seems to me not beyond the bound of possibility at all for someone who has a creative kind of mind to people a room with all kinds of imaginary spirits and give them names and characters and personalities which would suit the person who's receiving.
Yeah, but to speak in different languages. I mean, this woman, this medium, Aviva, my guide was supposedly Greek, and I said to my guide, speaking through the medium,
if you lived in the 18th century, as you said you did, I would like to hear your Greek.
All right, Joseph, as you wish.
Aviva's tongue was able to pronounce some kind of strange dialect, which Joe taped.
I took the tape of this supposed Greek to Dr. George Thaniel, who's a professor of modern languages at the University of Toronto and a native-born Greek himself. And I said, George, what do you make of this? And he came back to me 2 weeks later and said, this in part is a native-born Greek speaking.
So even though this entity was able to speak this language, which is called xenoglossia, and the language was verified as being an older type of Greek, certainly something very important was happening.
All I can say is that was a pretty daunting proof. And so that was one of the things that Joe was touting, was that he had this tape.
Philippa, through Aviva, asked me to endeavor to make communication with her on a daily basis. And so what I would do, I would go to my study every morning and hoist my legs up onto the oak desk and concentrate on making mind-to-mind communication with her. That was my hope. My response was to weep. I just broke down and I wept for several minutes. So this was some connection I was making at a deep emotional level. But again, the investigative reporter was saying, well, you can't trust this. You may be weeping, but what does that really mean? Maybe you're just too vulnerable to these things. But I went back to Aviva's house the following Friday, and my plan was not to say anything. And when Aviva went into trance, Philippa came rushing through her and said, "We have made contact."
Yes?
Now, I didn't go in there saying, "Hey, everybody, guess what happened? I made this wonderful contact." I didn't say a thing. Philippa was the one who came through to say what had happened, and nobody else in that room knew. So again, that was another brick in the wall of evidence that something remarkable was happening here.
I don't think Philippa was a writerly conceit for Joe, not at all. I think he took it very seriously, and I think he was very much enamored with her. And I asked him point blank if he had fallen in love with her when he first told me the story. And he said, who wouldn't fall in love with this ethereal, divine being who understood everything about you, accepted everything about you, and could read your thoughts?
Philippa became part of Joe's life. He now communed daily with his spirit guide. He credits Philippa with helping him write his book, Life Between Life. As public champion of channeling and reincarnation, Joe faced mounting hostility in the media. On CBC Television's primetime Crossfire, Joe gets a grilling that will change the course of his life.
Good evening. I'm Ron Collister, and this is Crossfire. Tonight, Beyond the Grave, we'll tackle the ultimate question: is there life after death?
I found this video in the archive. I think it marked a turning point in Joe's life.
What you call evidence is some person telling you, oh, yes, I've lived before.
No, it's
yes,
not.
I've been this. Yes,
no,
I've been
it's
that.
not. It's clinical psychologists doing years and years of work.
Clinical psychologists are always right?
This is based on Dr. Joel Witten's work.
This man is a psychiatrist,
Let me answer your question.
But how good are the facts?
He has taken 30 people back.
30 people? 30 disturbed people?
Would you let me finish?
That's a lousy sample.
He has taken 30...
I think that they're fantasizing under hypnosis and agreeing with
Will
them.
you let me finish? Will you let me finish? There are many people who go under hypnosis because they've got acute problems. They want to be healed, and conventional doctors can't help
this being used, this mixing of faith and very dubious science being used to sell books, sway people, medically treat them, that is astounding. The ethics of doing this suck.
I remember now Joe actually telling me about the Crossfire program and his experiences, that he'd had a strip torn off him. He said, I'm going to have to defend this. I have to see the research through. And I think that's part of what pushed Joe to the nth degree. He really wanted to find proof that reincarnation existed and be able to prove it.
Joe, as a journalist and as an investigative reporter, was actively trying to trace these guides back in their previous earthly incarnations.
If I ever thought anything about Joe in a critical way, I thought he was blind. And I thought he was purposely blind. Like he chose what he wanted to see, and he decided to just see that.
One of the guides claimed to be a World War II bomber pilot, and I thought that he would be the most easily traced. The name he gave for himself as the bomber pilot was William Alfred Scott, Flying Officer William Alfred Scott. I thought, wonderful. The squadron he gave was 99 Squadron Bomber Command. He gave the motto of the squadron. He described the insignia, a leaping puma on the badge of 99 Squadron. He gave it the names of his commanding officers, the airfields he flew out of during World War II, the Wellington bomber that he used to fly.
So you had some hard data.
Yeah, I thought, this is wonderful. My journalistic instincts told me that this was the only thing I had to go on.
Other people in the channeling group just took it on face value. They didn't bother to fly all the way to Greece and to London to research all these things. But Joe really needed to know. He really did believe in reincarnation. And he was a bit of a hero amongst the Buddhists and the New Age people and the sort of alternative culture people that I knew at that time, because in many ways he was ahead of his time.
Fueled by belief, Joe decides to write the groundbreaking investigation that will link reincarnation, channeling, and the spirit world. Its driving force is his love for Philippa Gavrilos. He will find proof that bomber captain William Alfred Scott and Philippa Gavrilos lived historically verifiable lives. His quest will take him to England and then Greece. His reputation, his career, perhaps his very identity will depend on the outcome. But Joe was about to have his world and his beliefs turned upside down.
Every spiritual tradition in the New Age says, get off your ass, strive spiritually yourself to become conscious on higher levels, but don't go luring spooks into the dark of your seance living room and try to get them to talk to you, because down that road lies very bad things.
After immersing himself in channeling, Joe Fisher's life is forever changed. When he claims he can speak with the dead, his credibility is called into question. The media, as well as his own sense of journalistic integrity, force him to realize that he must submit his beliefs to the harsh demands of proof. And so, Joe Fisher's search takes him to places and to people unknown. See the terrifying conclusion of What Killed Joe Fisher next week on Supernatural Investigator. I'm Robert J. Sawyer. Thank you for joining us. Hello. I'm Robert J. Sawyer, and this is Supernatural Investigator. Last week, documentary filmmaker Doug Williams investigated the bizarre life and death of Joe Fisher. The Toronto journalist and author had immersed himself in the beliefs and practices of trance channeling, but his strange obsession didn't stop with speaking to the dead. Joe fell in love with Philippa, a spirit who claims they were lovers in a past life. Attacked by a skeptical media, Joe Fisher traveled to Europe in search of the proof he needed to make his case for channeling. But when his discoveries changed him from believer back into investigative reporter, the spirit world fought back. Now, the terrifying conclusion of What Killed Joe Fisher on Supernatural Investigator.
During an investigation of trans-channeling, spirit guides, and reincarnation, crime reporter, author, journalist Joe Fisher turns from skeptic to believer in seeking advice and guidance from spirits of the dead. Joe set aside his journalistic objectivity and became a zealous defender of channeling, a believer in reincarnation and communication with channeled spirit guides.
Well, what did you have to work on in this incarnation?
Well, I think I had to work on bringing out the message of reincarnation to the public, which is why I'm sitting in this chair today.
Sure.
He was perhaps one of the first, shall we say, metaphysical journalists, or a journalist who investigated metaphysics.
He was certainly the most famous New Age writer in this country, and one of the really well-known ones anywhere.
Outside the media glare, Joe's life was filled with channeling and his growing obsession with Philippa Gavrilos, a channeled spirit who claimed that she and Joe had been lovers in Greece 200 years ago.
So there's a glint that you come to recognize, and it's the glint of delusion in the eyes of the devotee, and he had it.
But as Joe becomes publicly associated with the occult, the media turns hostile.
I'm pointing to very hard evidence.
There is nothing you call evidence
to point to reject that.
No, but what you call evidence is some person telling you, oh yes, I've lived before.
Joe's chosen path had led him here, to humiliation while pleading his case to professional cynics on the CBC.
I remember now Joe actually telling me about the Crossfire program, and he said, I'm going to have to defend this. I have to see the research through.
Fueled by belief, Joe decides to write the groundbreaking investigation that will link reincarnation, channeling, and the spirit world.
You were talking about a specific guide out of all of these groups of guides.
Yes, but the name he gave for himself as the bomber pilot was William Alfred Scott, Flying Officer William Alfred Scott. And I thought, wonderful. Now, yes, a name. The squadron he gave was 99 Squadron Bomber Command. He described the insignia, a leaping puma on the badge of 99 Squadron. He gave the motto of the squadron. He gave the names of his commanding officers, the airfields he flew out of, during World War II, the Wellington bomber that he used to fly.
So you had some hard data.
Yeah, and I thought, well, this is wonderful, and I encouraged him. I said, I want to go looking for you in the record books. I said, if I can find evidence, of hard evidence of what you're saying in the record books, then I'll know that you are who you say you are.
And so, naturally, Joe, being an investigative reporter, visited the British War Museum, and sure enough, there was such bomber with the serial number, but there was no such airman ever of that name.
He did all this work, he's working on the book, and all of a sudden, he goes on this trip, and he finds that these spirits who have allegedly been speaking to him through the medium have been lying.
Although most of the evidence I was given, most of the details could be confirmed, Flying Officer William Alfred Scott could not be found in the record books.
Despite his failure to find proof of William Alfred Scott's existence, Joe was certain that Philippa would not betray him. Following the failure of his England search, Joe traveled to eastern Greece, hoping to find the village of Theros, where Philippa had said they lived. There he would find the proof in local archives, ruins, or mausoleums of the life they had once shared.
Balakalo.
May I help you, sir?
Yes, please. I'm looking for the village of Theros. It's near here, I'm sure.
Theros? I'm living so many years here, but no Theros.
What about Gavrilos? I'm looking for a family by the name of Gavrilos. Philippa Gavrilos.
Gavrilos? Ούτε ακουστά Gavrilos, όχι.
I'm sorry, sir. Here is no Gavrilos, no Theros.
What lies in that direction?
That direction is the same direction as all the other direction. Olive tree and gods. This is the Greece, my friend.
He really wanted to know, was it real or was it not? And I think on some level he really needed it to be real. He really needed Philippa to be real. He needed to believe that there was some spiritual truth in the world, I think. Perhaps a different truth, a better truth than what his parents had told him.
He was obsessed with this Philippa, this person that some people will say never existed.
Philippa? Philippa Gavrilos?
Joe knew then that it was all a hoax. Philippa and Theros, their lives together, their tenderness. None of it existed, nor had it ever.
Joe gives me a call. He's out there somewhere in the wilderness of Greece or that part of the world, and he said, "You're right. It's not true." I met with Joe after he came back from Greece after that phone call. I would have to say he was absolutely devastated. He was just overwhelmed with sort of sorrow. This was such a betrayal.
So the fact you could find no living record of her or memory doesn't surprise me at all. It was like looking for the proverbial invisible needle in a haystack. There was no way that he would ever prove her existence, despite his best efforts.
Joe's angry at Philippa, but he writes now that he's also afraid of the spirits. On Sunday, September 13th, 1987, he visited Aviva for a special session, determined to confront Philippa.
We spent a long time discussing this past life information. It wasn't just as if I dashed off in a hurry. I came here many times to double-check your stories, and almost nothing Philippa said is true. There is no record of Theros, no Gavrilos family. Does Philippa have something to say about this?
If the value of that love and truth we've had between us is to be squandered because you cannot find the town of Theros, what basis is your life being lived on?
The point of all my research was to confirm what I felt inside.
You cannot prove of the existence of the guides, for we are not among you.
Then why do you bother telling us about reincarnation?
You are. Have you noticed that people do not like to have their fantasies smashed?
He got really nasty. He was angry at me, he was angry at everybody, and I was not willing to play to his anger. But when somebody stands in front of my car and bangs on the hood and says, "Don't you drive away from me!" I think this person's lost it. And I never saw him again after that, actually.
If you go after enlightenment, there are 4 things that can happen to you. 1, you can become enlightened. 2, you can go insane. 3, you can turn into a monster. 4, you can commit suicide.
What, for channeling, does that say to you? I mean, what do you think of the enterprise?
I think it's to be avoided, and it's potentially dangerous.
What are they channeling? You know, are they channeling your unconscious or something out there that's separate from you? Are we all one? Are we all separate? I mean, what is it? Who knows?
Joe would write in Hungry Ghosts, "I blamed myself incessantly. Self-loathing clung to every minute of every day. I knew I'd have to scrap my book on our so-called allies in the next dimension."
Now he's writing a book in which his initial hypothesis, everything had been geared to something, has turned out to be false. But not entirely false, you see, because there's something out there.
I think he was frightened enough and stressed enough in the whole process of writing the book that it really unhinged him for a while.
Joe warned the world with the publication of Hungry Ghosts, but that's not the end of the story.
What it all meant was that at the end of the day, Joe Fisher is sure that there are some kind of spiritual constellations, hungry ghosts as he's calling them, that's a Tibetan term. He's sure that there are these myriad spirits out there, but they're not benign. They're not like guardian angels that save you from walking across against the red light or something. These are, in fact, people who are kind of slavering to get into your existence.
I think that Joe contacted a group of lowlifes who waited for their chance to see if they could push him at every stage just a little further towards that cliff.
In 1991, the year after the publication of Hungry Ghosts, Joe married a Toronto dress designer. They moved into an ancient farmhouse near Fergus, Ontario, where Joe would write. But suddenly, Joe's life spiraled downwards. And creeping in with the terrors of the night, Joe fears that he's made implacable enemies in the realm of spirits. In 2000, Paraview Press reissued Hungry Ghosts as The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts. The Siren Call refers to demonic women in Greek mythology who lure men to death with an irresistible song.
He would talk about his demons, but not in maybe a sense that everybody has their own kind of demons or their own things to kind of work out issues or whatever. He did speak about these demons as though they were entities outside of himself that were manipulating him.
Hollywood optioned Hungry Ghosts and hired Joe to write a screenplay. It was never produced. He found a job teaching writing, but then his marriage collapsed. He suffered a paralyzing back injury that brought a sudden end to his athletic lifestyle. In his mind, vengeful demons had conspired to nudge him prematurely towards failure, old age, poverty, and anonymity.
I believe that his circumstances physical, financial, and emotional were what drove him over the edge.
Everything was going downhill. He started talking about all the things that did not seem to be working in his life, and he was becoming more and more confused.
Joe's consumption of an antidepressant became increasingly alarming to his friends. Among the listed effects of the medication are anxiety, nightmares, delusions, and attempted suicide. So, what killed Joe Fisher? Everything and nothing. Surely, I thought, the answer lies somewhere in these pages. Then I turned to the beginning, to Joe's dedication. It reads, "To my dear mother Monica, who has always insisted that demons do exist." You've probably heard the Jesuits have a saying, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I will give you the man." Did the idea of demons lay the foundation for Joe's beliefs and even his fate? In March 2001, Joe and Dr. Joel Witten agreed to collaborate on a new book, The Dark Night of the Soul. This is the last known video of Joe Fisher.
Perhaps the greatest or most obvious example of Dark Night of the Soul could be Jesus Christ on the cross crying out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" In a sense, it's a time when we're all on the cross in our lives, where everything seems hopeless, there seems no way out.
As he was terrified of getting older, he was dead broke, and the book that we were working on wouldn't see any monies coming in for upwards of a year.
There's a saying that says, life's a bitch and then you die. Well, we trust that this book is going to give the lie to that blinkered perspective, explaining why people's lives are, and indeed must be, filled with difficulty. Because this is how we grow. This is how our destiny is achieved. This is how we climb the metaphorical mountain of consciousness, leading to cosmic consciousness.
I feel awed by how difficult his life must have been. One of the things that stands out in Joe's chart is that it looks like he was tyrannized. From a very young age, there was like a shadow or some kind of very powerful energies around him that made him feel powerless right from the beginning.
On the morning of May 9th, 2001, 2 hikers found a body in the Grand River at the bottom of Elora Gorge. It was identified as Joe Fisher.
What killed Joe Fisher? I think the simplest answer and what comes to mind would be grief. I don't think he ever recovered from it. The belief system that he had, and it came down to him from his mother, was that demons do exist. My own belief system, I would agree with him. Wherever there's light, there's darkness. Wherever there are angels, there are demons. Because everything in existence is a balance and has its counterpoint. So I would say that he drifted over to the dark side and could not find his way back.
Maybe at that point, Joe decided that his life was just so crappy. He was in pain, he was in debt. He realized that his relationships hadn't been good, and he just decided, okay, it ends here.
But it didn't end there. There are 2 mysterious details from the police accident report. This skid mark, perhaps made by Joe, who fought being pushed over the edge, was noted by the police investigators. Its cause was listed as unexplained.
It wasn't a clean jump. It seemed that there was some kind of a sliding motion, or there were prints that seemed to be left. And I think it was the broken branches that made people wonder.
Joe did express to me that he felt haunted by dark forces. I don't know if he was actually possessed when he killed himself. I mean, how would you prove that? but he did speak of being haunted.
At the end of Hungry Ghosts, Joe wrote of his experience with Philippa and channeling. I am simply grateful to have survived my confrontation with the liars and deceivers of the spirit world. Only when the struggle was far advanced did I finally comprehend the meager state of my resources, as well as the might and swiftness of the unseen enemy.
Few of us have that kind of life. Few of us branch into other worlds that have not been fully explored. So his untimely suicide really shook us to our cores. And we're still looking for an explanation 10 years later.
I miss him, you know.
It's impossible for us to know for sure what killed Joe Fisher. Loss of youth, divorce, unemployment, early success and later failure, antidepressants, or his beliefs. Perhaps we'd all feel better if we called Joe's story of Hungry Ghosts a hoax. But it would be unfair not to give Joe himself the last word.
I must make this point before this show closes, is that death is like a homecoming. It's birth that's the difficult thing. You know, the Druids used to have a huge party when someone died, and they used to weep when a baby was born.
Why?
Because they knew that when you come into this earth, this is where the suffering starts.
From childhood, Joe Fisher's mother taught him that demons exist. Throughout his spiritual odyssey, from Christian fundamentalism to Tibetan Buddhism to complete disillusionment, Fisher never shook his belief in demons and the world of suffering that they can inflict on all of us. Belief kills thousands in this world each day. Did Joe Fisher's deepest beliefs lead to his untimely demise? We investigate, you decide. I'm Robert J. Sawyer. Thank you for joining us on Supernatural Investigator.